Matthew's here with today's business. Hurricane Sandy, of course, as we've been saying in the news, nearing New York. Stock markets and companies making some very special precautions, aren't they?
Yes, they are, Stuart. Both the New York Stock Exchange and the Nasdaq will be closed for trading on Monday. That could even extend into Tuesday, and there are plenty of other preparations going on as well. Banks, including Citigroup and Goldman Sachs, shifting operations to other cities out of New York. Many staff working from home today. A lot of key personnel as well have been spending the night in hotels so that they can get to work in Manhattan. Of course, the network, the transport network has been shut down there. That carries 8.5 million people a day. So plenty of people having duvet days today, I suppose, working from home while that takes place.
Sure. And stock markets that are open, how are they actually looking?
Yeah, well, here in Europe, of course, stock markets just opened. In fact, we can take a look at what's been happening in Europe in the early minutes. And as you can see, they are all falling down slightly. And it was a similar story in Asia on Monday. The markets there also in a similar mood. Markets will be waiting to see the report from the US on unemployment later this week. Also, still some feeling that corporate earnings are not quite what they should be. The Nikkei there, as you can see, virtually flat. And we're going to stay in Japan because the government there is struggling to plug a hole in the country's finances. And the problem's so serious that the Prime Minister has been warning this Monday that they could run out of money by the end of November. Pretty serious stuff. Well, earlier I spoke to the Guardian's correspondent in Tokyo, Justin McCurry, and I asked him to tell us just how serious this problem is.
Well, potentially it could be very serious, not just for the Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda, but for the Japanese economy. Today, the Japanese Parliament has just begun this extraordinary session that will last until the end of November. The idea is not to debate the budget itself, but to win opposition support for a bill that would help fund $470 billion US budget deficit for the current fiscal year. The indications are at the moment that the opposition, which is accusing the Prime Minister of reneging on a previous deal over tax in return for which they expected an early election, which now doesn't look likely, is also not going to support this this budget covering bills.
Justin McCurry there. We're going to stay with Japan. In fact, Honda saying its full year results are going to be weaker than expected.
That's right. Now, they were actually reporting first half profits, which doubled. So that was pretty good news, up to $2.7 billion. But, as you say, Stuart, they expect their full year profits to be down 20%. Reasons for that? Well, the strong yen that we're always talking about, that hurts exporters, but also, of course, this long-running dispute now with China over islands in the East China Sea. Now, in September, you might remember the sales of Honda in China fell by 40%. That's really doing them some damage there. Their share price fell over 4.5% on the Japanese stock market today.
OK, well, back here in France now, Francois Hollande facing a bit of a showdown, really, with the head of Google.
Yes, the executive chairman, no less, of Google is flying into Paris to meet Francois Hollande. The reason for that is he's angry about plans by France to charge search engines for linking to French newspapers and magazines. Well, in return, Google is threatening not to reference those newspapers if the plan goes ahead.
It's the default search engine for many and increasingly the first place we go for information. But Google also gives you advertisements with your results, a concern for some newspaper editors fighting for the same market.
Google, c'est pas seulement un moteur de recherche.
Google is not only a search engine, it's a huge advertising agency, a broker. They've taken about €1 billion in advertising away from us, and they've done so by referring to our content.
The French print media has been in trouble for many years. Some titles have moved from print to online, while others have had to turn to the government for support. That kept more newspapers in business, meaning that circulation figures are lower. For example, Germany's Bild newspaper sells about 3 million copies a day, compared to 2.5 million for the British tabloid The Sun. France's biggest selling daily, Le Figaro, sold just 324,000. The French media want the government to tax Google for taking a share of their advertising revenue, but it's a complicated proposal.
C'est très difficile de faire accepter ça à Google.
It's very hard for Google to accept because Google lists the French newspapers and all the French media, blogs and lots of other sites. And that brings traffic to their sites. So they can say, we're doing you a favour. You're known because of us.
In response, Google threatened to stop indexing French media websites, a potentially catastrophic move for the publishers, and one which will be high on the agenda as Google's CEO meets the president and culture minister in Paris later.
And poor old Francois Hollande, he's got more than just one angry boss to deal with, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. Now, you may remember a few weeks ago, entrepreneurs here in France scored a big victory when they got the government to water down proposals on capital gains tax. Well, now bosses of many of France's biggest companies have been inspired by that, launching their own campaign. They want to see a cut of 30 billion euros in social security contributions, as well as spending cuts of about 60 billion euros over the next 5 years. They say they need that to help them to be more competitive in the global market. They've signed a letter, 98 of them have signed a letter that will be delivered to the government today.
Okay, another Francois Hollande story. He's got a busy day today, the French president. He's trying to win support for his economic plans.
Yes, now, as well as all of this, he's meeting some of the great and the good, really, from the global financial world. We can take a look, actually, at who Francois Hollande will be meeting in just an hour or so from now. Heads of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization, they're all coming together. He's looking to them to get support for what he's doing. And as well as that, there's a chance they will, of course, be putting pressure on him to stay on those reforms to get the budget deficit down. Now, in fact, this is the kind of meeting that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel has every year. It's the first time it's happening in France, and all of those bosses will be heading off to Berlin to meet Angela Merkel on Tuesday.
Okay, now we've got a planned merger between two of the world's biggest publishing houses. It's going to go ahead.
That's right. So Penguin and Random House, two very big and very well-known names in publishing, are merging. Now, News Corporation, owned by Rupert Murdoch, actually tried to step in, reports said over the weekend, to buy Penguin, and that would have meant this not going ahead. But it's been announced by the two companies this morning they are going to go ahead. The joint venture will be named Penguin Random House, with Bertelsmann, which is the German group owning Random House, owning just over 50%, and Pearson, which owns the Financial Times as well as Penguin, owning just under 50% of that. But should say the deal isn't done, they'll create such a big company that regulators are sure to be sniffing around this one to make sure they are happy there's not going to be too much power in one company there.
Couldn't they just call it Penguin House to kind of shorten it?
That's a
It'd
much
be
better
easier.
name.
We'd remember it then, wouldn't we? Another batch of Facebook shares being released today. Last story from you, Matthew.
Yes, that's right. Now, 270 million shares are due to be released today. Now, this is because a lot of shares were locked up after that flotation in May. They're gradually being released. Now, a lot of these are owned actually by Facebook employees, and there's an expectation that perhaps a lot of them will try and get in and sell them. But of course, as we were saying earlier, the stock markets are closed today. The Nasdaq is closed today, so we won't be able to see what's going on or what effect it's going to have on the share price. But I can just show you that since the flotation back in May, when it launched at $38, it closed at about $22. There have been a few little blips upwards since then, but it's been a story of decline. So later this week, we'll be seeing what effect this has had.
Okay, Matthew, I'm sure we'll be telling us about that then in a couple of days' time. All right, Matthew, thank you very much for the business news, the latest news. Claire, of course, here after the weather.